All right, good evening. It's great to see all of you here tonight. Looks like you're dedicated students. Even after 8 months of attending lectures for classes, you're showing up to maybe what is an optional lecture for some of you. I understand that some of you are also sent here by some of your requirements for your classes, but it's great to see everyone here, and it brings back memories to when I was a student here at Iowa State 12 years ago, and I attended several exciting class lectures. And while I was in those lectures, my mind sometimes would tend to wander onto other topics that I was more interested in. And my mind is wired like most male brains are, so you can imagine where my mind often drifted off to. Yes, food and females are the two things that get a lot of attention from guys and is on their minds a lot, which explains the reason for the success of the Hooters restaurant chain. So let's start by taking a moment to look at the title of today's presentation. Let's prepare for Earth Day: Organics, Sex, and the Lorax. Organics is referring to organic food. So organics and sex are the two main things that we'll be talking about tonight. Earth Day is mentioned because the purpose of this day is to increase awareness for appreciation of the Earth's natural environment. We tend to think a lot about scientific studies that have been done showing us man's impact on air quality, water quality, soil quality, and wildlife, and what we should do in response to those studies. The Lorax, as many of you may know, is a Dr. Seuss book that has been recently made into a movie. The Lorax has a similar theme about acting in a responsible manner in regard to our natural resources, but it takes a different approach. The Lorax doesn't reference any scientific studies which looks at the physical dimension, but rather the Lorax appeals to the morals and ethics, or the spiritual dimension. This is obvious in the fact that the Lorax is a cartoon godlike figure. We humans have both a physical dimension as well as a spiritual dimension. Or another way of saying it is that we have a body, a physical body, as well as a soul, a spirit. So during the course of the next 45 minutes, we're going to be looking at organic food and sex from both the physical and spiritual perspectives. So in case some of you are not familiar with this movie that's just out, I'll take a moment to show you the trailer. So if we take a look at what the main points of the theme of this movie are, I think the first thing that sticks in your mind is that they mentioned that the town of Thneedville is plastic and fake. And they liked it that way. Well, why is that? Why do these people like a plastic and fake world? Well, might I suggest that the reason that they like living in a plastic and fake community is because it's cheap and easy. And when you make things in a factory, in an industry, you have strict controls over things. For example, if you have AstroTurf in your lawn rather than regular grass, you don't have to deal with dandelions. You don't have to deal with dead things. But for some reason, we don't settle for something that's plastic and fake like AstroTurf. We want the real stuff. The other thing that we see is that this is a love story. There's a beautiful girl, and she has a request, and that is the first step in changing the world. Because there is a guy, well, the request that she has is that she wants to experience real life. She wants a real tree. And then there's this guy, Ted, who's fascinated with this female. And this guy is willing to risk it. He's willing to go outside of the town of Thneedville so that he can obtain the tree seed for this beautiful girl. And it's a struggle against good. It's a battle between good and evil. and a struggle against power and greed, which is represented by O'Hare Air Company and Mr. O'Hare. But Ted is willing to make that sacrifice. And it all starts with that seed. Now, once the seed happens, once they find the seed, there's a battle that takes place. All right, so you get an idea from this song about what the battle is. The battle is between letting it grow and letting it die, or the battle is between death and life. That's the battle that's laid out with a seed here. And what that makes me think about is agriculture, because agriculture, of course, is the business and the industry of producing lots of seeds. I also see in agriculture this same battle between letting it grow or letting it die. So let's look at agriculture and food and how this relates to the story. Producers want a high level of control over their production systems, which is the industrial model. Cheap and easy seems to be the theme for our food system. You could say that our food production system has become more plastic over the years. This is not good for humans or the environment. Let's look at some findings of some scientific researchers and see what you think. Does it sound more like a system of death and letting it die, or a system of life and letting it grow? It says that nitrates in drinking water are statistically associated with the increased risk of bladder cancer at levels lower than the EPA standard of 10 parts per million. According to the University of Iowa study, almost 22,000 women, and including 22,000 women, long-term heavy use of nitrogen fertilizers in Iowa has resulted in nitrate concentrations in excess of 5 parts per million in 30 to 40% of the state's municipal water supplies, according to the study published in Epidemiology. Peter Weyer of the University of Iowa Center for Health Effects on Environmental Contamination and colleagues analyzed cancer indices in women participating in the study. They found that women drinking water with an average nitrate level of greater than 2.46 ppm, which is way lower than the EPA's 10 ppm, were 2.83 times more likely to get bladder cancer when compared to women that were drinking water with only 0.36 parts per million of nitrates. So does that sound like let it die or let it live? Sounds like a system of death, having all of these nitrates in our water. If you look at some researchers at Iowa State University, they're concerned with water quality as well in Iowa. In particular, there's high levels of phosphorus due to the use of farm and lawn fertilizers. Phosphorus levels in Iowa are some of the highest in the world, according to John A. Downing, professor of aquatic ecology at Iowa State University, noting that this contributes to algae blooms. And when there's algae blooms, it sucks away all the oxygen in the water, and the other living organisms die in the water. So does that sound like we're part of a system of death or a system of life with this agriculture? Sounds like a system of death again. There is also a study published in the Environmental Health Perspectives that showed that consuming organic products may lower children's exposure to potentially damaging pesticides. And this study was conducted at the School of Public Health and Community Medicine at the University of Washington. And what they did was they went to grocery stores that sell regular food, and they recruited some kids from families that were shopping there, and they also went to some stores that sell organic food, and they recruited some kids that were eating that food for this study. They had to record on a journal everything that they consumed for food, and after 3 days, they collected urine samples from these children. They found that the children that were consuming the regular food diets had higher level of organophosphorus pesticide metabolite concentrations than the children that were eating the organic diets. In fact, one of the groups had a level 6 times higher than the children eating the organic diets. So This is again showing that there's food residues in the conventional system of agriculture that we can avoid with an organic system, which illustrates this dichotomy of life versus death. There's also a study that was done on hormone residues in cow manure. About 2/3 of the beef animals are injected with synthetic hormones so that the cattle grow faster. But the problem is that they are excreted from the cattle in their manure, and when the manure is applied to the farm fields, these hormones can contaminate surface and groundwater. Aquatic ecosystems are particularly vulnerable to hormone residues. Recent studies have demonstrated that exposure to hormones has a substantial effect in the gender and reproductive capability of fish, throwing off the natural cycle. And so what they were finding is there were not really male fish that were in the rivers. They were kind of this androgynous or partially female type of fish because they were affected with these synthetic hormones. So again, with a conventional system of agriculture, does that sound more like a system of death or a system of life? I think it's clear that synthetic herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides are not good for the people and they're not good for the environment. And so I think the obvious conclusion is that we should try to avoid the use of them. And that's the central idea of organic food production. It's to implement a natural system that does not rely on harmful synthetic chemicals. And do you know what the driving force behind the 20% annual growth rate during the last 25 years in the organic marketplace has been? It's been women. Women are the main consumers of organic food. And then there's farmers like me who are willing to take the risk and make the sacrifice to be organic farmers. There's only about 2% of the farmland in the United States that is under organic management. The response by most farmers when they're presented with the possibility of organic farming goes something like this. That would be ridiculous. People wanting organic food are out of touch with reality. They don't understand the modern technology involved in agriculture. Yields will greatly decline and weeds will take over the fields. If those environmentalists take away our bottled pesticides, you can say that that's war on us farmers. When a sprayer misses a strip, I know exactly what that crop looks like. So let's take a look. These are some pictures from my organic farm. And one of the really important concepts in making an organic farm work is diversity. And so I have 3 main different crops that I raise. One of them here is soybeans. And the soybean is a really great crop because it's a legume. And what legumes can do is they have bacteria that are growing on their roots that are able to fix nitrogen. Nitrogen is a major nutrient that crops need, and you do not need to add nitrogen to soybean fields because these plants can capture the nitrogen out of the air because of these bacteria and provide enough nitrogen on their own without additional nitrogen. There's also nitrogen left in the soil after the crop is done. And so the next crop I plant after soybeans is oats. And oats is a grass crop. It doesn't make its own nitrogen, and so it utilizes that nitrogen from the previous crop. And then you can see that with these, with this oat crop, there's green in between the windrows of oats, and that is alfalfa and clover. Alfalfa and clover are another legume crop, and so they also produce nitrogen. The next spring, this alfalfa and clover are plowed under into the soil. And some people, when they see this, they're like, Don't plow your hay under. That's valuable stuff. You should cut that off and sell it to a dairy farmer. It's $200 a ton right now. How can you just plow a good crop of hay under? Well, it's really important to make that sacrifice because there's living organisms in the soil and they need to eat as well. So as the clover and alfalfa is decaying, it's providing food, and that will make the soil healthier for the following corn crop. And here's the corn. It is a grass again, and it doesn't produce its own nitrogen, so it gets its nitrogen from that previous crop of clover. So there's a system, and all the different parts of the system work together, and there's a lot of diversity. Now the other thing is you probably noticed that as far as weed control, things look pretty good in these organic crops. In this slide right here, you see there are some alfalfa plants that escaped the plow, but they're not really going to hurt anything. So how does this weed control system work? Well, again, one of the critical factors is the crop rotation. Well, and I guess I forgot this slide. This is the cornfield when it's about ready to harvest, and you can see that it has some good-sized ears on it. It yielded about 160 bushels per acre, which is in line with what the range of normal corn crop yields are. And you can see that at harvest time, the rows are fairly clean. And there's a picture of the soybeans as well at harvest time. They're yielding just as good as the soybeans would yield if you had sprayed the weeds. So what's the key to keeping these weeds out? Well, again, like I said, it's the crop rotation. Oats, they're a crop that you plant early in the season, like late March and early April, and the soil temperature is only 40 degrees at the time. But most of the weeds that affect corn and soybean fields germinate at a 50 or 55 degree soil temperature. And so you're able to get these oats planted and growing before any weeds start to emerge. So they kind of get a jump on it. Plus you can see that the field is solid seeded. There are no bare spaces between the rows, so that crowds out the weeds as well. And another advantage of the oat crop is you harvest it in July. And so these weeds that are a problem in corn and soybean fields, they don't produce seed until the fall. And so when you cut the oats off in July, it prevents any weeds that might escape from going to seed and being a problem in future years. So the oat crop is really important for crop rotation. And also with the solid seeded, you don't have to do cultivation, which could lead to some erosion. Now the advantage that corn has in the crop rotation system is that it grows up really tall, and so it blocks out the sunlight from any weeds that might be growing later in the season. So as long as you get off to a good clean start with the corn, you're able to keep the weeds under control. The disadvantage to the corn is it germinates at 50 degrees soil temperature, which is the same temperature that weeds germinate. So if it's a good condition to grow corn, it's also a good condition to grow weeds. So weeds are going to be a little bit more of a challenge to start that crop off. And then as we move on to soybeans, some organic farmers do not like to grow soybeans because you can see all the weeds in the field because they're short. And I kind of like soybeans because I can make sure I get all the weeds pulled out. And you can see that there's a big patch of weeds in this organic soybean field. Unfortunately, I didn't do a very good job on the cultivation. This picture is from 5 years ago, and since then I like to think I am doing much better. But I have my lovely wife here helping out, and eventually we got this bean field cleaned up. So I guess if we think back to that little clip of the Lorax movie, we have the O'Hare Air Company in that clip. And what he was trying to do is sell bottled air to the people. And I guess that's what I really feel like is happening in agriculture. Farmers are being sold bottled weed control. And I guess from the pictures that you see here, why do we need it? I've got my hands. We can do it for free. And I prefer that my hands are on the steering wheel of the tractor driving the cultivator. That's much better than pulling the weeds out by hand, but sometimes that happens. And I admit that it takes more work being an organic farmer than if we were using synthetic herbicides. When I'm pulling weeds on a hot July day and I see jet skis driving by to go to the local river for a day of fun, it really makes me think. But there's something that's really fascinating about organic farming. And for me, it's like an adventure into the mystery of Mother Nature. And so taking the risk is fulfilling, especially knowing that you're making the lives of other people better and you're doing less damage to the environment. So I guess now that you see what organic farming is like, does it sound more like a system of life where it's let it grow, or a system of death, let it die? I think we can agree that there's a lot more life involved in this system. If we look back at this slide about the theme of the main storyline of the Lorax clip, we see some of these things come out in organic agriculture and conventional agriculture as we compare the two. The idea of things being plastic and fake, I think that's illustrated in conventional agriculture, and we like it that way. Why? Because we like cheap and easy food. We saw the beautiful girl with a request that changed the world in the clip, and she wanted a real live tree. And as I said, women are the main consumers of organic food, are the main purchasers of organic food. And so us organic farmers are doing it for them. We're like Ted, the guy that's willing to take the sacrifice, make the sacrifice, and work hard to make it possible. And it's also a struggle against the evil power and greed that exists in this world. So I guess the idea of seed and life really ties into organic farming. But have you ever considered what the food is that we eat and how all that ties together? So let's look at a diagram of the food that we eat. And when we think about a seed, we know that seeds are the main ingredient in making all of the foods that are classified in that bottom category, the cereal and bread group. We also see seeds up in the middle category on the side, the vegetable group, with the corn and the peas. Those are both seeds. So there's a lot of seeds that are used as the main ingredient in our foods. But what is a seed? Well, we can look at the definition. And the definition of a seed, according to your biology textbook, is a mature ovule. An ovule is a female plant reproductive part. So you can see that there's some parallels here between food and sex. If we look at a picture of a seed, a peanut seed is a good example of what a typical seed looks like. And there's two main parts of a seed. Down at the bottom, we see a baby peanut plant. The bottom of that little chunk is the embryonic root. And above it are the baby peanut leaves. So we have a baby plant, and surrounding the baby plant is the baby food provided by the mother plant that will nourish the baby plant until it emerges above the surface of the ground and is able to photosynthesize and make its own food. So we see life here. So now let's take a look at some of the other foods that are not classified as seeds. The group here in the middle, of course, is the fruit group. When you eat fruits, a lot of times there's seeds inside those fruits. But if we look at the definition of what a fruit is, according to the biology book again, a fruit is a ripened ovary. So again, we're thinking about female reproductive parts. As we move on to the milk, meat, and egg group, eggs, of course, are from the reproductive parts of chickens. And an egg is a lot like a seed because the baby chicken needs to have everything to develop that it needs for the first 21 days of its life. The the shell provides the protection, the shelter for the baby chicken. The yellow part is the yolk, and that is a food source for the baby chicken. And the white part is the water supply for the baby chicken. And the shell is porous enough that allows this baby chicken to breathe. So what eggs are is they're essentially baby food for the baby chicken that could develop. But most of the eggs that you're buying in the grocery store are not fertilized, so no chickens are ever going to grow in them. But the food is still there. And then we go on to my favorite group, which includes ice cream, the dairy group. And if we think about where milk comes from, we're again thinking about the beauty of the feminine body. As far as meat, meat, of course, is not from the female reproductive parts, but on a livestock farm, there's a lot of females in order to produce all the livestock, and that livestock is fed a lot of seeds in order to grow the meat. So I guess when we say that guys are mainly interested in food and sex, it's because of essentially just one thing: their attraction to the feminine. Eating is about consuming life, and life leads to more life. And isn't that what we saw in those slides about organic farming and how the system works? The crops, as they're rotated, help out and provide something to the next crop that follows. When we also had the crop of the green manure crop that was tilled under to feed the life in the soil. So now that you know about food and organic farming, I think that it's clear to see that there's a theme of life and letting it grow here. We've seen how better food, we've seen how better food, a better environment, and better human health can be realized in an organic system. A system that does not rely on synthetic chemicals. But the question we all want to know is, what's the secret to better sex? Well, a couple of weeks ago, as I was shopping in Hy-Vee, I happened to see this on a shelf in the checkout line. And of course it says right here, hotter, carefree sex. Seems pretty appropriate to sell this type of a magazine in a food store. After we see the connections that are made between food and sex. But what baffles me is that, are there really any secrets left? Because every single magazine in that checkout line has an article similar to this about the secrets to better sex. And it seems like every single month they come out with a new edition that has the same type of articles in it. So I'm wondering, when are all the secrets going to be told so that they're no longer a secret? Well, let's go and check out what the secret is according to Self magazine. It says we got to turn to page 144. Here's what we see on page 144. It's a picture of all these different contraceptives. Now, I was really hoping for some more fascinating pictures in an article about sex. But we'll go in, we'll give it a chance here and see what they have to say. As we flip over to the next page, the title is, Let's Talk About Sex. Safe sex. Hot, fun, carefree. A great night between the sheets starts with making sure you've got great protection. Well, that's kind of interesting. Let me get this straight. What you're telling me is that if we treat a female's body with synthetic hormones so that a properly functioning reproductive system becomes disabled and is therefore not able to support life, that is the key to great sex. Now, from what I know about farming, is that it's better to avoid synthetic chemicals. But let's read on. You can see that 80% number down there, and it might be a little bit small for you to see what the rest of the sentence says, but it says 80% of the respondents in a Self.com poll said that they would like to change at least one thing about their current birth control. The top reasons: it's costly, it's killing their sex drive, and it's making them gain weight. Now, I kind of suspected this. And as we go on with the article, they have this nice little organized chart here that across the top of the chart lists all the different types of birth control that are available. They have the pill, the mini pill, the IUD, the patch, the ring, the implant, and the shot. And in this chart, they have some concerns that are listed. For example, with a pill, it says, maybe it will cause me to gain weight or lower my sex drive. And below that, they have a comforting little sentence here that says, a few studies have linked the pill to lower libido, but that has more to do with sex drive slowing down as a relationship progresses, experts say. You know, things get a little bit stale. And the weight gain, well, that's due because a lot of times people start using the pill at times when there's major changes in their life. For example, when they go off to college. And we all know what happens when you go off to college. You gain the freshman 15. So it's not the fault of the pill. If we look at the patch, they're worried that maybe it'll increase blood clots. Well, their response is, all estrogen birth control methods carry a small risk for blood clots, but the patch may double the risk according to research, possibly because it exposes you to more estrogen than a typical pill does. But even then, nothing to fear, because there's a higher chance that you could get blood clots when you're pregnant. All right. If we move on to the NuvaRing, the concern is maybe you could put it in wrong. Or what about blood clots happening from that? Well, putting in the NuvaRing is really easy. It's just like putting in a tampon, according to their response. It's about 91% effective. And if it slips out, you can just put it back in as long as it's within 3 hours of it coming out. As for the blood clots, the ring appears to have the same risk as the pill, which is, of course, very small. Well, it's very nice that Self magazine can put us to ease about the concerns and try to convince us that we need to buy birth control in order to have great sex. It kind of reminds me of what Mr. O'Hare was trying to do in that movie clip when he was comforting Ted about his search for the seed. You know, you don't really need to go outside of town. There's nothing good out there. Just stay here. And we know what Mr. O'Hare's motivation was. It was all about the money. Well, it just so happens that as we flip the page of the last page of the article, what we see next is an advertisement by Merck Corporation for the NuvaRing. And this page right here, it cost $180,000 for a 4-color, 1-page ad to run in one issue. So not only did Merck buy a 1-page 4-color ad, but they also have another 1.5 pages following in black and white that tells about all the possible risk and side effects. So you can see that there's a vested interest here in Self magazine trying to convince you that you need to have birth control in order to have great sex. Now, what about our government? They seem to be kind of promoting the same idea. Free contraception is something that women need to stand up for and demand. Well, Merck and other companies that make birth control products have those bases covered as well. Cost a lot of money to get reelected, and politicians want to get reelected. OpenSecrets.org shows that during the 2010 election cycle, Merck Corporation contributed $2 million to election campaigns. And they made sure to cover both sides of the aisle. Here's the list of how much money they spent and who they spent it on. First, we have the National Republican Congressional Committee, $30,000. Below that is the Democratic Congressional Committee, $30,000. We have the Republican Senatorial Committee, $30,000, and the Democratic Senatorial Committee, $30,000. As we scroll down, we can see all of the different politicians that they contributed to. Friends of John Boehner, $10,000. Orrin Pack, $10,000. I assume it's Orrin Hatch. Rush Holt for Congress, $10,000. And the list goes on. It all totals up to be $2 million. So women, selling contraception is not about better sex. It's about the money. Your bodies contain the seed of new life. Your bodies contain the eggs of new life that will become our future generations. And your bodies provide the environment for the right start of life when it is most vulnerable. Your bodies are more sacred than the soil on my organic farm. So you can see that you're in the middle of this battle about, should we let it grow or should we let it die? Cheap and easy. Those words are so fitting for our modern food system, but they're just as fitting for our modern idea about sex. You could say that our food production system has become, you could say that our idea about sex has become more plastic over the years, but it's not good for humans or the environment. If we look at some of the warnings that are listed on the back side of this Merck ad, you see that they say you should not breastfeed while you're on NuvaRing because the hormones could come through the breast milk and affect your infant. It can cause blood clots. It can cause stroke and heart attack. If you have high blood pressure and heart disease, you should not use NuvaRing. Breast cancer has been diagnosed slightly more in women who use the pill than in women the same age who do not use the pill. It can cause liver tumors. It also says here that other common side effects are vaginal infections, irritation, vaginal secretion, headache, weight gain, and nausea. Doesn't sound like this is very good for women at all. If we look at the American Cancer Society webpage, they list right here on the list of known ingredients that cause cancer, estrogen, progesterone, oral contraceptives, and also hormone replacement therapies are listed there too. These are things that are known to cause cancer. Cigarette smoke, asbestos, radon gas, those are other things that are on this class list, this class 1 list. There's also studies that have shown that women who use the pill choose poor mates, and it interferes with the pheromones that are emitted. And so what they found is that females, in the way they're attracted to other guys, there's some way that they can sense if they have different genes than what their own genes are. And so what's best for heterosis and hybrid vigor is that your mate has genes that are different than yours. And you'll have stronger children that way. And so when you use the pill, it disrupts that system. And they also say that women they tend to choose more boring lovers if they're on the pill when they pick a boyfriend. If they go on to get married and then go off the pill, sometimes their attraction to this guy changes once they go off the pill. Another thing that we see is that they found that the synthetic hormones in birth control are excreted through the woman's body, just like we were learning about the beef cattle. And so it goes into the sewage treatment system, and it doesn't break down. It ends up in the rivers, and it's affecting the aquatic life. And of course, this contraception doesn't prevent STDs as well. So it sounds to me a lot like this idea about better sex from contraception is an idea of letting it die and of death. It's not good for people and it's not good for the environment. So maybe we shouldn't use these things. That's what the Catholic Church has promoted for centuries. Natural sex does not harm women. So what that means is if you like sex, you'll probably spend most of your adult years barefoot and pregnant. Now, do I hear, let it grow, let it grow, let it grow? Anybody let it grow? I'm kidding. The Catholic Church does not promote you being home barefoot and pregnant for most of your adult life. What the Catholic Church really promotes is responsible parenthood. And in developed countries like ours, it takes a lot more effort to prepare children for society simply because of the greater level of education that is needed today compared to society 100 years ago. So the Catholic Church believes that sex is dirty, tainted, and evil, and that you should avoid it at all cost. And that unless you want a baby, and that explains why priests can't marry. Okay, wrong again. The Catholic Church does promote responsible parenthood, but it also teaches that sex between husband and wife is healthy for each other and that they should engage in sex often. Now, I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church, and I didn't know much about the Catholic viewpoint on sex. But I fell in love with a Catholic girl, and shortly after our engagement, she made a request that has the power to change the world. And this is what she said. She said, I want to be treated like a queen in our future marriage. I want to be respected. I understand that 2/3 of men your age view pornography more than once a month. I don't want to be your 3-dimensional fix for a 2-dimensional addiction. I don't want to be treated like a recreational object. And I don't want to put harmful chemicals into my body. I want to be united with you, and I do not want to have anything put between us. And since I do not think that I'm equipped to raise 17 kids, I'm asking that you attend natural family planning classes with me to learn more about how my body works. And I'm like, okay. She goes on to say that as husband and wife, it is important that we totally give ourselves to each other. And in order to not end up with 17 kids, we will need to avoid marital relations during a few days each month. And natural family planning class will teach us how to determine those days with 99% accuracy. To which my response was, that's awesome! It means you must work just like a cow. Now, she did not share my enthusiasm of making this comparison between agriculture and sex. Because I knew that cows are capable of only conceiving during a couple days each month. And if a farmer is using artificial insemination methods, they must make observations to determine when ovulation is occurring. And also from my experience in agriculture, I knew that synthetic chemicals were not healthy. So I was excited that the Catholic Church had this figured out. Just like organic farming, only about 2% of people use natural family planning methods exclusively. But the divorce rate for these people is only about 5% compared to the rest of general society, which is more like 50%. I'll admit that it does require sacrifice at times. But there is something that's fascinating about it. And it helps to develop a fulfilling marriage that includes hotter, carefree sex, especially when you've abstained for a week. And it doesn't harm people or the environment. So I guess if we look back at our original slide that outlines the story of the Lorax, it seems like there's a lot of connections here again with sex and this story. Plastic and fake, essentially that is what our general society is promoting And we like it that way. Cheap and easy sex. We want to have control, just like a factory, over our women. Also, I told you about a beautiful girl requesting that we not use this synthetic fake sex type of strategy. We want to have real sex. And it does involve sacrifice, just like Ted in this movie, where he has to go out and get the seed. And it is also part of this struggle against the power of evil and greed. Just trying to get your money to sell you something. I'm serious about the ability for women to change the world on this issue. Arguably, the most loved person of the 21st century was Pope John Paul II, and he understood the power of a woman and what love really means. At the age of 9, his mother died, so he dedicated his life to the Holy Mother. Motivated by his strong faith and love, he spoke out against communism and how the lack of freedom was a violation of human dignity. Change was needed for the good of people. And in those days, our government leaders worked with the Catholic Church rather than trying to pick fights with it. The Pope was largely responsible for the fall of communism without killing a single person. But the Pope also spoke out against Western society. He saw the plastic fake society that we were building, and he referred to this as the culture of death. He pointed out injustice and change that is needed. He believed that strong, loving marriages are the foundations of strong, loving families. Strong, loving families are the foundations of strong, loving communities. Strong, loving communities are the foundations of strong, loving countries. And strong, loving countries are necessary for a world filled with love. The Lorax suggests planting the tree will change the world. And that helps out. But the real power is in how we view our sexuality. Men are crazy about you and willing to do anything for you that you request. If you find it acceptable to treat your body as an object by putting synthetic chemicals in it, men will probably not treat you much better. But if you stand for life rather than corporate profits and political favors, then you will initiate something that will change the world. Men, you have a role to play as well, too. It involves sacrifice and taking risk. And Pope John Paul II is a good example of this in the way he lived his life. So what do we do next? If you want to learn more about how to farm organically, you can attend Iowa State University's Organic Farming Conference this next fall, or take some classes offered here on the campus. If you want to learn about transforming the world through sex as it was meant to be, I suggest that you attend a seminar on Pope John Paul II's theology of the body. You can do a search on the internet for it, or you can stop over to St. Thomas Aquinas Catholic Church across the street and talk to Father Jim. Even if you're not Catholic, all are welcome there. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. And Matt will have some time for questions, but I want to give just a break if anybody wants to leave now before the questions. So this is a time to scoot out, and then there's a mic in the back for you to ask your questions from. Just raise your hand for the first question. Go ahead. Just go to the mic in the back.
I know that you talked about how you dealt with the weeds growing in your organic crop.
Yep.
I was just wondering what you do about
All right, so he's asking about how insects are controlled. And again, it's a lot like the weeds. The crop rotation is really important. And so one of the main insects that farmers are worried about is corn rootworms. And the way the corn rootworm life cycle works is the corn rootworm beetles come and lay their eggs in the field the year before. And if it was a cornfield and you plant corn in there again, you're going to have corn rootworms growing. But since I have oats the year before, the rootworm beetles are not laying their eggs there, and so I don't have as much problem. Soybean cyst nematode is another, well, they're nematodes, but they're kind of like insects. They're another form of pest. And again, that crop rotation is really important. If you plant soybeans 2 years in a row or every other year, it's more likely that you can build up numbers of the soybean cyst nematode. But as you stretch out that crop rotation, they don't multiply as quickly and don't become as much of a problem. There's also, and I don't, these are used more in vegetable production. I don't use them on my farm, but there are organic approved insecticides that are natural products. For example, the chrysanthemum flower produces natural pyrethrum, which is an insect repellent. So there's those type of products. Dipel or Bacillus thuringiensis is a natural bacteria that's found in the soil, and so that can be used to kill Lepidoptera insects, such as the ones that are caterpillars and moths, those type of insects, cabbage worms. Does that answer your question? All right, you're welcome. Any other questions? Any other comments? Sure.
Okay, so your view on not putting synthetic things into your body, do you also apply that to other general medications?
Well, I think you need to understand that there are situations where you do get sick, and there's a place for using these medications, but it's just not good to be dependent on these things all the time. And so the comparison that's being made here is in organic agriculture, for example, antibiotics can't be used. A lot of the poultry that's being grown or hogs, they have low level of antibiotics in all of the feed that they're fed to help them grow faster. That's not something that's allowed, and what that is doing is it's helping create these strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So we don't want that. So that's not what's good, but if you do get sick, if there's an organic animal that gets sick and you've tried to prevent the problem and take care of it using natural methods and it doesn't work, we don't want to just let the animal suffer and end up dying, so you want to treat it with that medication. And so the same idea kind of applies to our human health, is we want to try to prevent problems, and then when we absolutely need to do something that requires medicine, I'm not going to say never take medicine and die. That doesn't make any sense. But we shouldn't use it just because. Good question. Any other people brave enough to ask a question? All right. Well, thanks.
Let's give Matt a hand.
Thanks for coming, and I hope that you found it to be insightful or helpful in whatever you were looking for. So have a good evening.
Matt will be around here a little while asking personal questions or private questions. Thank you all for coming and participating in our lecture tonight. 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 Our lecture tonight.